What is a history fact that is so stupid it doesn't seem real? Not one but two kings of France died by smashing their heads on the top part of a door lintel. Charles VIII in 1498, the shock probably caused something else but still. Louis III on the other hand was pursuing a fair lady, who was actually trying to escape him, on his horse on the 5th of August 882, when she passed a door. The horse went through, not the king, who broke his skull and died instantly. The last one sounds like something straight out of those slapstick cartoons like Tom Jerry or Looney Tunes. Yeah, but more like Itchy and Scratchy though. A man from New York missed his friends who were fighting in Vietnam. So he traveled thousands of miles to track them down in a combat zone to personally give them beer and letters from home. He even wrote a book about it called The Greatest Beer Run Ever. This is the best thing ever. I'm envisioning a drunk dude in a Hawaiian shirt with an upside-down map walking through the jungle in Vietnam yelling, "Hey, Mikey. George. You guys here? It's Tony." During the Spanish-American War. The Spanish governor of Guam wasn't told about the war. When a U.S. warship showed up he was happy to see them, cause he thought they were just visiting. Boy was he wrong. If I remember right, the governor of the island apologized to the warship captain that he couldn't return the traditional cannon salute because he had no gunpowder or ammo. Then he learned about the war. Honestly, lucky coincidence. Imagine what might have happened if a fully armed warship with the intent to invade heard cannon fire upon its arrival. It is said that Greek tragedian Aeschylus died because an eagle dropped a tortoise on his bald head, mistaken for a rock, in order to break the shell of the tortoise. Now that's a tragedy. It's a comedy. And due to him being a tragedian, it's an irony. How the Berlin Wall fell. In order to calm mounting protests, GDR officials decided on loosening travel restrictions between East and West, not open the border completely. Notes of the new rules had been handed to a spokesman who hadn't had time to read them before the press conference. Private travel outside the country can now be applied for without prerequisites, he said. Surprised journalists clamored for more details. Shuffling through his notes, he said that as far as he was aware, it was effective immediately. In fact, it had been planned to start the next day, with details on applying for a visa. But the news was all over television, and East Germans flocked to the border in huge numbers. As the border became inundated with East Berliners wishing to reunite with family and/or escape the GDR, border guards became overwhelmed, and with no orders to either shoot upon the crowd or open the gate, only a handful of guards facing hundreds and thousands of citizens, rather than fire and create a stampede and potentially kill hundreds. The head of the guards decided to give the order, open the barrier. What came next was a spontaneous chain reaction, with Berliners on both sides arriving at Checkpoint Charlie to celebrate this momentous event and to demolish the wall. So basically, an ill-prepared functionary made a flippant remark, and a border guard captain unable to get orders on how to proceed led to one of the most defining moments of the late 20th century in Europe. Boss, you think maybe you should read those notes before you go on the air? Duck it, we're doing it live. What's the worst that could happen? Or more, here is what you're supposed to say. Are you ducking kidding me? It is literally 30 seconds until I go on stage. Why wasn't this here 30 minutes ago? Party management wanted to make sure it was correct. Benjamin Hornigold was a pirate in the late 16 and early 1700s who once robbed a merchant vessel purely for the crew's hats because he and his crew got so drunk the night before that they all threw their own hats overboard for no good reason. Tycho Brahe, an astronomer, had a pet moose. That moose later died from a fall down the stairs. Because it was drunk. Edit, thanks for all the upvotes and awards. I had, no joke, 19 karma before this comment, so I was really not expecting this to blow up, haha. Everything about Tycho Brahe is amazing. His nose was cut off in a duel, and replaced by a prosthetic made out of gold. He died when his bladder exploded because he drank too much alcohol. He had a friend, Jeppe, who he believed was a psychic dwarf. He was one of the wealthiest men in Denmark and owned a private island, which housed his observatory, before he went into exile after a spat with the 11-year-old king. Edit, okay guys, I get it, his prosthetic nose was brass and not gold. I fail to see how that makes him any less awesome, however. I like to think that Jeppe was actually like an inch shorter than Tycho, but Tycho just kept insisting he was a psychic dwarf, and now that's all that anyone knows about Jeppe. Alright, I don't remember the specifics. But there was a king, I believe a Sumerian king, who was told by an oracle that disaster would befall the king. So he had a gardener crowned as king for a day, and that night the gardener would be executed, thus fulfilling the prophecy and saving the real king. Soon after the gardener's coronation, the real king choked on soup and died. The gardener ruled for 24 years. Edit, n.m.wikipedia.org. Some lovely folks told me the full story. Man's literally choked on a liquid. The fates were like not today, mother ducker. More people have died from drowning in molasses than being attacked by coyotes. That's just because molasses got lucky. Yeah, molasses-KD ratio is totally skewed by that one incident. There was a real plan to spike Hitler's food with estrogen to try to turn him into a woman and make him give up on war. Hitler estrogen plan. Reminds me of the plan the US once had of using rockets from submarines around Cuba to shoot up star-shaped shells in the sky to convince the Cuban people of the Second Coming so that they'd overthrow Castro and surrender. The guy who came up with the plan denies it vehemently. But everybody else who was in the room says he really proposed it. Why does every plan for Cuba sound like they got it from the writers of Looney Tunes? Everyone knows that Acme had a monopoly on the military-industrial complex during the Cold War. During World War I, Germany converted and armed a passenger cruise liner, the SMS Cap Trafalgar, into a cruiser, and sent to the Atlantic Ocean to disrupt British shipping. Off the coast of Brazil, though, when they received word that a British ship was coming to flush out German ships disrupting British shipping, the SMS Cap Trafalgar decided to disguise itself as another ocean liner turned cruiser, the HMS Carmania, so that they wouldn't be shot at. The British ship that came to deal with the SMS Cap Trafalgar was the HMS Carmania, which promptly sunk the fake one. That sounds like my kind of luck. In 1184, a number of nobles from across the Holy Roman Empire were meeting in a room at the Church of St. Peter, when their combined weight caused the floor to collapse into the latrine beneath the cellar and led to dozens of nobles drowning in liquid excrement. It is referred to as the Erfurt latrine disaster. I bet their obituaries were like, died at church. Rest in piss. As World War II revved up, the US realized that fast and cheap was the way to go with manufacturing ships, ex-Liberty ships. But there was a line of escort carriers made with so little armor that some Japanese armor-piercing shells went through the hull and out the other side without exploding. A nice surprise. WarfareHistoryNetwork.com. The reason the biggest and most powerful battleship in the world, Yamato, never sank anything in the battle off Samar was that a US destroyer kept charging toward it. The admiral didn't want to turn and present the side of his ship to a torpedo attack, so he just kept running away. From a ship 1/40th the size. The Japanese had a very effective torpedo using liquid oxygen, instead of compressed air. In the battle off Samar, though, they found that the 5-inch shells from the smallest ships would set the oxygen equipment on fire and blow up the torpedoes in their tubes. At least 6 Japanese heavy cruisers were sunk this way. One was probably destroyed by a shell from the 1 5-inch gun that the Gambier Bay was armed with. Did the Yamato actually do anything useful for the entirety of World War II? I think it only sank one enemy ship in the entire war, Gambier Bay, and even that was disputed. Its entire role in the war seemed to have been making the American Navy waste time by going around it. The way I understand it, no. Yamato and Musashi kept being held back from the front lines until the Japanese leadership saw the writing on the wall because it was feared their loss would be too detrimental to morale. Honduras and El Salvador had a 3-day war over a football game. Like a really violent riot, or their governments actually got their militaries involved. Yeah, it was a legit war. I mean, it was more than just a war over a football game, but it was that game that seemed to push people over the edge and start war. There were already tensions going on between the two countries. A Skylab satellite's guidance system was failing and ended up crash landing in Australia. Instead of giving the satellite back, Skylab was charged with a $500 littering fine. After the fine was paid, the company wanted to put the satellite in a museum but was refused on the basis that since the satellite fell from space, it's legally Australia's now. So now, Skylab pays a monthly rent to Australia to display its own satellite in a museum. Edited for accuracy. A quote from Winston Churchill when he was visiting the White House and the president walked in on him buck naked: "The Prime Minister of the UK has nothing to hide from the President of the US." Churchill was far too comfortable with his own nudity. There are many stories of meetings and missives being conducted while he was in the bath. Edit, I get it, LBJ had a big dick. Sounds like he would have loved Zoom meetings.